I still remember the exact moment my father called me. His voice, usually so proud and demanding, sounded small for the first time in my life. He didn't even bother pretending everything was normal. The first words out of his mouth were, "Please, we need your help." I just stared at my phone because only a few weeks earlier, on my own birthday, those same parents had handed my younger brother the keys to a brand new car while handing me something completely different, a lecture about how I wasn't entitled to anything. They smiled as he celebrated, then looked at me and told me that successful people don't expect gifts. They said I should be grateful just to have a family. I smiled, congratulated my brother, and quietly left before anyone noticed I was crying. But here's the thing nobody at that table knew. I had already made a decision that night, and it would completely change every one of our lives. So tell me honestly, if your parents treated you like that your entire life, then suddenly begged for your help after everything fell apart, would you forgive them? Or would you finally let them face the consequences of the choices they made? Growing up, I always knew there were different rules for me and my brother, Ethan. He was 2 years younger than me, but somehow he was always the center of the universe. If he got a B in school, my parents celebrated by taking him out to dinner. If I got straight A's, my father would nod once and ask why I didn't get extra credit. If Ethan forgot to clean his room, my mother would laugh and call him her messy little genius. If I left one cup in the sink after working all day and attending college classes at night, she'd tell me I was becoming lazy. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Kids don't like believing their parents have favorites. We tell ourselves there must be another explanation. But year after year, the evidence piled up until even relatives quietly noticed it. My aunt once whispered to me during Thanksgiving that I was the strongest young woman she knew, because she'd never seen someone treated so differently inside the same family. I laughed it off because admitting the truth hurt too much. Money made the favoritism impossible to ignore. When Ethan turned 16, Dad bought him a used truck because, according to him, a young man needs transportation. When I turned 16 a couple of years earlier, I asked if I could have driving lessons. Dad looked at me and said, "Girls don't need expensive hobbies. You'll marry someday and your husband can drive." I worked after school for nearly a year to pay for my own lessons and eventually bought an old car that barely started every morning. Ethan made fun of it constantly, calling it my rusty shopping cart. My parents laughed every single time. Despite everything, I kept trying to earn their approval. I graduated near the top of my college class while working almost full-time. I landed a great job in marketing. I rented my own apartment without asking them for a penny. I even paid off my student loans early. Every achievement felt like maybe this would finally be enough. Maybe this would finally make them proud. Instead, every success became another reason to criticize me. My father would say I worked too much. My mother would complain I visited too little, even though I was usually the one driving across town, while Ethan rarely showed up unless he needed money. Meanwhile, Ethan drifted from job to job. He quit whenever his boss expected him to show up on time. He borrowed money he never repaid. He lived with my parents rent-free well into his 20s. Somehow none of this was his fault. Dad blamed the economy. Mom blamed bad employers. Everyone blamed someone except Ethan. When my 30th birthday approached, I actually felt optimistic. It was a milestone birthday, and my parents had insisted on hosting a family dinner. My mom spent weeks talking about how special it would be. She even asked me what kind of cake I wanted. I thought maybe this year would be different. Maybe they were finally ready to treat me the same way they treated my brother. The restaurant was beautiful. My grandparents, cousins, and a few family friends were there. Ethan showed up 45 minutes late wearing sunglasses indoors. Nobody cared. My father actually stood up to hug him while I sat there wondering if anyone remembered whose birthday it was. Dinner was pleasant enough until dessert arrived. The waiter rolled out my cake, everyone sang happy birthday, and for one brief moment I felt seen. Then my dad stood up smiling. "I have one more surprise," he announced. I honestly thought it was for me. Instead, he walked everyone outside into the parking lot, where a shiny new SUV sat covered with a giant red bow. My father handed the keys to Ethan. My brother screamed with excitement. Everyone clapped. I just stood there completely confused. Finally, I asked, "Wait, whose car is that?" Dad laughed. "Ethan's, of course." I smiled awkwardly. "Oh," I thought. Before I could finish, my mother interrupted. "This is actually a lesson for you too, sweetheart." A lesson? On my birthday. She put her arm around me, while Ethan admired his new car. "You've always been independent. Material things don't matter to you. Ethan still needs encouragement. Besides, birthdays aren't about presents once you're an adult." I looked at the giant bow, still hanging from the SUV. "So why does Ethan get a present on my birthday?" Dad sighed dramatically, almost embarrassed that I asked. "Because families help the child who needs it most. You already have a career. Stop comparing yourself." Then came the lecture. They told me successful people don't expect rewards. They told me generosity meant celebrating other people. They told me jealousy was ugly. My own birthday somehow became a speech about my supposed selfishness. The worst part wasn't even my parents. It was Ethan. He smiled at me while spinning the keys around his finger. "Don't worry, sis, maybe next year." Everyone laughed except me. I excused myself, paid my share of the dinner bill because somehow I'd been expected to cover my own meal, hugged my grandmother goodbye, and drove home alone. I cried the entire drive. Not because of the car. Not because I wanted expensive gifts. I cried because after 30 years, I finally accepted something I'd spent my whole life denying. Nothing I ever did would be enough. I wasn't competing with my brother. The competition had been decided before either of us could even walk. That night, I sat in my apartment with mascara running down my face and made the hardest decision of my life. I stopped chasing people who had already decided my worth. The next morning, I muted my family group chat. I stopped initiating calls. I politely declined Sunday dinners. When Mom asked why I seemed distant, I simply said I was busy with work. Technically, it wasn't a lie. I poured every ounce of energy into my career. Within 2 weeks, something incredible happened. A company I'd interviewed with months earlier called offering me a senior management position in another city. The salary was nearly double what I made. The benefits were amazing. The company even offered relocation assistance. Old me would have called my parents first. Instead, I accepted before telling anyone. When I finally informed my family, my mother frowned. "That's pretty far." Dad added, "Who'll help us around here?" I almost laughed. Help? The daughter who never received help was suddenly expected to provide it. Ethan rolled his eyes. "You think you're too good for this family now?" "No," I answered calmly. "I finally think I'm good enough for myself." That silence lasted several seconds. It felt wonderful. I moved 3 weeks later. My new life was everything I hoped it would be. New apartment. New coworkers. New friends. Most importantly, peace. Without constant criticism, I realized how anxious I'd always been. Without weekly comparisons to Ethan, I started celebrating my own accomplishments. My confidence returned. I even started dating someone kind named Daniel, who looked genuinely confused whenever I apologized for things that weren't my fault. One evening he asked me, "Who taught you that you have to earn basic love?" I didn't know how to answer. Months passed. I heard occasional updates through relatives. Apparently, Ethan had already scratched the new SUV. He'd missed several payments despite my parents covering most of them. He'd quit another job. Nothing surprising there. Then something unexpected happened. Before I tell you what came next, I honestly want to know what you would have done in my position. Imagine spending your whole life trying to earn your parents' love only to realize the rules were never the same for you. Then imagine finally finding happiness after walking away. If the people who hurt you suddenly called begging for help, Would you rush back because they're family? Or would you protect the peace you fought so hard to build? Pause for a second and think about it, because I genuinely struggled with the answer myself. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. My phone rang. Dad. I almost ignored it. Something told me to answer. His voice sounded older. We need you. No greeting. No apology. Just need. What happened? He took a deep breath. Ethan crashed the SUV. My heart dropped. Is he okay? He'll recover. Relief washed over me. Then Dad continued. The insurance situation is complicated. Complicated meant expensive. Apparently, Ethan had ignored multiple insurance notices after changing addresses. Coverage had lapsed. The accident involved several vehicles. Medical bills. Property damage. Lawsuits. The total financial disaster was enormous. Dad admitted they had emptied most of their savings, helping Ethan over the years. Now they were drowning. Finally, he said the words I never expected. We were hoping you could loan us some money. Loan. Interesting choice. Because they had never repaid any previous loans to Ethan. I stayed quiet. Dad kept talking. You've always been responsible. Translation. You're responsible enough to clean up his mess. Then Mom got on the phone crying. We're family. That sentence hit differently now. Family. Where had that word been on my birthday? Where had family been when they humiliated me? Where had family been every time they chose him? I asked one simple question. If the situation were reversed, would you ask Ethan to help me? Silence. Long silence. Finally, Mom whispered. That's different. There it was. The truth. Even now. Even while begging. The rules were still different. I thanked them for being honest. Then I said something I'd rehearsed in my head for years without realizing it. I love you both, but I will no longer sacrifice my future to protect Ethan from the consequences of his choices. Dad exploded. So you're abandoning your family? I answered quietly. No, I'm refusing to abandon myself anymore. He hung up. For 2 days, my phone stayed silent. Then relatives started calling. Apparently, my parents had told everyone I refused to help. They conveniently forgot to mention decades of favoritism. Messages flooded in accusing me of being cold-hearted. One cousin even called me selfish. Instead of arguing, I invited anyone criticizing me to contribute money themselves. Funny enough, nobody volunteered. A week later, my grandmother called. She asked if she could visit. When she arrived, she hugged me for a long time. Then she handed me an envelope. Inside were old birthday cards she'd secretly kept. Every card contained cash my grandparents had intended for me over the years. I looked confused. She smiled sadly. Your mother always said she'd keep it safe for you. There was thousands of dollars inside. Money I'd never known existed. Grandma had recently discovered my parents had quietly spent it helping Ethan. She demanded they repay every cent. Tears filled my eyes. Not because of the money. Because for the first time, someone acknowledged what had happened. Grandma squeezed my hand. You deserved better. Those 3 words healed something inside me. Months later, the lawsuits forced my parents to sell their house. Ethan finally had to get a steady job. Not because he wanted maturity. Because life gave him no alternative. I heard through relatives that reality was difficult for him. For the first time, excuses couldn't pay bills. One evening, another call came. This time, it was Ethan. He sounded nothing like the cocky brother I remembered. I owe you an apology. I stayed quiet. He admitted he'd always known our parents treated us differently. He admitted he enjoyed the advantages. He admitted watching me leave made him realize how much responsibility I'd carried. Then he surprised me. I'm not asking for money. I know. I just wanted to say, you didn't deserve any of it. It wasn't a magical ending. We didn't suddenly become best friends. But it was honest. Sometimes honesty is enough. Over the next year, my relationship with my parents slowly changed. Not because I gave in. Because I didn't. Boundaries forced conversations we'd avoided for decades. Dad eventually admitted they'd expected more from me because they believed I could handle it. I told him strength isn't permission to neglect someone. Mom cried when she realized she'd confused dependence with love. Healing wasn't quick. Trust wasn't magically restored. Some wounds leave scars forever. But at least we finally stopped pretending the scars weren't there. Today my life looks completely different. I earned another promotion. Daniel and I are engaged. We bought a beautiful home together, using money we saved ourselves. Whenever I celebrate my birthday now, I don't measure the value of the gifts. I measure the people around the table. People who clap because they're happy for me, not because they're celebrating someone else. Looking back, I realized the greatest gift my parents accidentally gave me wasn't the lecture they delivered on my birthday. It was the moment they pushed me far enough to finally stop begging for love that should have been freely given. Sometimes the people who underestimate you become the reason you discover your own worth. Walking away wasn't revenge. It was survival. And choosing yourself isn't selfish when you've spent your whole life choosing everyone else first. If you were on my side, make sure to like this video. If stories like mine remind you that self-respect matters, subscribe for more Reddit-style stories every week. And now I really want to hear your opinion. Would you have helped my parents after everything they put me through? Or do you think I made the right decision by finally saying no? Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section because I genuinely love to read them. Thank you for listening to my story. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all in the next story.